This is a rock face in southern China. Run your hand down it and you will cross a line. Below that line, the rock is packed with fossils, shells, corals, the debris of a complete working ecosystem. Above it, there is almost nothing. And there will be almost nothing for the next 5 million years. The line itself is thinner than your hand, and inside it, there is ash. "252 million years ago, most of the life on this planet died, not across an age, not across an era, in about 60,000 years, which in the rock is that line. We have known roughly where it started for decades. There is a volcanic province in Siberia, and the dates match. What nobody could explain, until quite recently, is the middle of the sentence. How does a volcano in Siberia kill a clam in China? This is before us, the history of the world before anyone was here to see it. The date is 252 million years ago. There is one continent, one ocean, and more species alive than at any previous point in the history of this planet. And hold on to that ash. We are going to come back to it, and what it is made of is going to change what you think killed this world. Start above the line while everything still works. There is one landmass. Pangaea runs almost from pole to pole, and a single ocean covers most of the planet. Stand on the shore of one of those shallow seas. Warm water, clear to the bottom. A reef running away from you in both directions until it disappears into the haze. Sponges and corals, built up over millions of years, holding more species than these seas have ever held before. Look down, and the seafloor is not sediment, it is shells. Brachiopods packed so tightly that you cannot see the ground between them. There are still trilobites here, 300 million years after they first appeared, though they are down to their last few species. Turn around, and the land is stranger than the water. The dominant animals are not reptiles, they are therapsids, an entirely different branch, and it is the one that leads to us. Something the size of a cow moves through the seed ferns with tusks and a beak. Behind it, something fast and sharp-toothed is paying attention. None of them are dinosaurs. Dinosaurs do not exist yet, and will not for another 20 million years. Nothing about any of it looks fragile. Now, before we go any further, one question. You have almost certainly heard a number attached to this event. 96% of marine species. It is in textbooks, in documentaries, on museum panels. Put it in the comments now so you can see where you started. I will come back to it. Now for Siberia. Beginning about 252 million years ago, an enormous volume of magma rises under what is now central Siberia and erupts. Not from a mountain, from fissures, long cracks in the crust that open and pour basalt across the landscape in sheet after sheet, one flow cooling before the next arrives on top of it. The eruptions continue on and off for around 1 million years. The lava ends up covering something in the order of 7 million square kilometers. That is an area comparable to Australia. It is one of the largest volcanic events in the entire history of the planet. And it happens at exactly the moment the world dies. Nobody thinks that is a coincidence. What an eruption like that does to a planet is chemistry, not violence. Magma carries dissolved gas. When it reaches the surface, the gas comes out. Carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and a range of others. Sulfur cools the planet briefly because sulfate aerosols reflect sunlight. But sulfur washes out of the atmosphere within a few years. Carbon dioxide does not. Carbon dioxide stays. And across the extinction interval, sea surface temperatures rise by more than 10 degrees Celsius. Warm water holds less dissolved oxygen. That is a physical property of water, not a fact about biology. The oceans warm and they lose oxygen, and they lose it fastest exactly where the water is warmest, in the shallows, which is where almost everything lives. At the same time, a fraction of that carbon dioxide dissolves into seawater and forms carbonic acid, which makes it harder to build a shell out of calcium carbonate. Warmer, less oxygen, more acidic, all at once and all from the same cause. And there it is, the first answer, and it is the one in almost every account of this period. The Siberian volcanoes erupted, the carbon dioxide did the rest, and the world suffocated. But there is a problem with that story, and it is a problem of timing. The province matches, the individual lava flows do not. High-precision dating of the Siberian rocks shows that the flood lavas began well before the extinction and continued long after it. Most of the lava is not synchronous with the dying at all. If the lava were the killer, the killing should track the lava. It does not. In 2017, Seth Burgess, James Muirhead, and Sam Bowring published a different reading of the sequence. They identified a sharp change in the character of the volcanism. At a certain point, the magma largely stopped reaching the surface and began spreading sideways underground instead, into sheets called sills, injected between layers of existing rock. That sill complex covers more than 1.5 million square kilometers. And it is that change, not the lava, which lines up with the extinction, because of what the magma was spreading into. Underneath the Siberian traps lies the Tunguska Basin. It is between 3 and 12 kilometers thick. It covers about 1.2 million square kilometers, and it contains carbonates, evaporites, oil, gas, and coal. On the order of 3 trillion tons of it. When magma at 1,000 degrees is injected into a coal seam, the coal does not simply sit there, it bakes. It releases methane and carbon dioxide, and in places it burns. The volcano then did not kill the world with lava. It killed the world by setting fire to a coal field the size of a country. And there's one more thing about that coal that is worth saying out loud. It was made by forests. 60 million years of swamp forest falling into water too stagnant to rot them, stacking up and compressing into carbon that the planet had slowly taken out of circulation and put away underground. Siberia put a large fraction of it back in about 60,000 years. How does that kill a clam in China? The rock record answers that with unusual precision. Carbon comes in 2 stable forms, and living things preferentially use the lighter one. Carbon that has passed through biology carries a distinct isotopic signature. Roughly 10,000 years before the peak of the extinction, the oceans record a sharp pulse of that light carbon. It is the fingerprint of an enormous quantity of biological carbon entering the system very quickly. Not carbon from the mantle, carbon from something that had once been alive. What that carbon does next is measurable. Global temperatures climb. Sea surface temperatures in the tropics reach around 40 degrees Celsius, a value at which marine animals die and photosynthesis stops. And the warming attacks from 2 directions at once. Warm water holds less oxygen. But a warm animal also needs more oxygen because metabolism speeds up with temperature. Supply falls at exactly the moment demand rises. These animals do not starve, they suffocate in water that looks perfectly ordinary. And the ocean squeezes from below as well. As oxygen drains out of the deep water, the seafloor becomes uninhabitable, not everywhere at once, but across enormous areas. There is a lethally hot layer at the top and an anoxic layer at the bottom, and between them a band of water that is still survivable. That band gets narrower. Paul Wignall and colleagues call this the double whammy, and it explains something the simple warming story cannot. It explains which animals died and which did not. The survivors are overwhelmingly the ones that could tolerate low oxygen or that happen to live in the middle. What comes out of that is not a reduction, it is a deletion. Picture that seafloor before and after. Before, it is so completely covered in shells that you cannot see sediment between them. After, there is sediment and a scatter of the same shells, empty. Reefs vanish. Not decline, vanish. There is a gap of several million years in the fossil record during which there are no reef structures anywhere on Earth. The trilobites, which had survived 300 million years and every crisis in between, end here. So do the sea scorpions. So do most of the brachiopods that had carpeted the seafloor for the entire Paleozoic. That is the second answer. The ocean cooked from above, suffocated from below, and most of what lived in it did not come out the other side. It is the version told almost everywhere, and there are two things wrong with it. The first is the number you wrote in the comments. It comes from a single paper, published in 1979 by David Raup, who used a statistical technique to extrapolate total species loss from an incomplete fossil record. The problem is what went into the calculation. The late Permian does not contain one mass extinction. It contains two, separated by about 5 million years. Raup's figure pooled them. In 1994, Stephen Stanley and Jiangning Yang separated the two events. In 2016, Stanley published a fuller revision in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, correcting for background extinction and for a clustering problem in the original method. His figure for the terminal Permian crisis is about 81%. That is still the worst thing that has ever happened to life on this planet. It is simply not 96. And the second problem is larger than the number, because everything I have just described is the ocean, and the ocean is not where this started. In 2024, Yadong-sun and colleagues published a timeline in Science showing that the marine extinction lags the terrestrial one by roughly 40,000 years. The land died first. And that breaks the explanation, because warming on its own does not kill a continent. When the tropics get too hot, land species move. They go north, they go south, they go uphill. That is what animals do, so what stopped them? The answer proposed by Sun's team is not about how hot the world got, it is about how unstable it became. Their model starts from a measurement. Across the latest Permian, atmospheric carbon dioxide roughly doubles, from about 410 parts per million to about 860. In their simulations, that doubling does something specific to the machinery of the climate. The overturning circulation of the ocean collapses. The Hadley cell, the convection system that drives tropical rainfall, contracts. An El Niño, which in the modern world is a fluctuation lasting a year or two, becomes prolonged and extreme. Not a hot world, a violently unstable one. Years of drought, then years of flood, then drought again, at an amplitude nothing alive had ever had to survive. That is what kills a continent. An animal can walk away from heat. It cannot walk away from a climate that changes character every few years, because there is nowhere that is reliably anything. The forests go first. And when the forests go, so does the largest mechanism this planet has for pulling carbon back out of the air. So carbon dioxide climbs further, which makes it hotter, which makes the El Niño stronger, which kills more forest. A study published in 2025 put a name to it: a runaway feedback in the Earth's climate carbon system. The planet did not simply get hit, it lost the ability to correct itself. This is not settled, and it is worth being honest about where the argument still is. The land record is difficult to date. In 2020, Robert Gastaldo and colleagues redated the sequence in the Karoo Basin in South Africa, the single best terrestrial record of this event anywhere on Earth. They found that the faunal turnover long used to mark the extinction on land actually predates the marine extinction by more than 300,000 years. The marker used for decades may not have been marking what everyone assumed it was. The order of events is broadly agreed, the precision is not. Now go back to that ash. When the boundary layer was examined closely, the particles in it were not what a volcano makes. Volcanic ash is angular glass, shattered magma quenched in flight with sharp broken edges. These particles are different. They are tiny hollow spheres, and that shape is diagnostic. It is what you get when pulverized coal burns and the residue cools in the air. Fly ash, the same material that comes out of the chimney of a coal-fired power station. Deposits of it turn up in Arctic Canada, thousands of kilometers from Siberia, which means it went high into the atmosphere and traveled. The ash in that line is not the volcano, it is the coal. So what actually happened here? Not a volcano in the way that word is usually meant. There was no ash cloud that blotted out the sun, no wall of lava sweeping across continents, nothing that would have looked like a catastrophe to anything standing there. There was a slow, enormous, unglamorous chemistry experiment. Magma spread sideways into a coal basin and cooked it for a very long time. The carbon that came out killed nothing directly. It changed the behavior of the atmosphere. The atmosphere changed the behavior of the ocean. And somewhere at the far end of that chain, a clam in China ran out of oxygen. And the reason it went as far as it did is that the world lost its own brakes. The forests that would have pulled the carbon back down were the first thing to die. What follows is the part that is hardest to picture. The extinction takes about 60,000 years. The recovery takes 5 million. Through that entire interval, the tropics are effectively uninhabitable. Land temperatures reach 50 to 60 degrees Celsius. Sea surface temperatures sit around 40. There is a band across the middle of the planet where almost nothing lives at all. And in the rocks immediately above the boundary in the Karoo Basin of South Africa, more than 90% of the vertebrate fossils belong to a single genus. Lystrosaurus, a stocky, tusked, burrowing animal about the size of a large dog. Not a reptile. A therapsid, the branch that leads to mammals. For several million years, most of the animal life on the surface of this planet had one face. One animal in a world that had lost its brakes. And the brakes are the part I keep coming back to. Because the brakes were made of coal, it took those swamp forests something like 60 million years to take that carbon out of the air and lock it underground. Siberian magma put a large fraction of it back in about 60,000. That is the whole event in one sentence. Everything else, the heat, the anoxia, the El Niños, the 5 million year dead zone, is downstream of that single exchange. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, slow, careful, and honest about what we do not know, the like button genuinely helps this channel find people like you. And the number you wrote down at the start. If you put 96, so did I for years. 81 is not a smaller disaster, it is a more accurate one. Because the world that comes out of this is almost empty. One animal nearly everywhere and very little else. The therapsids do not get it back. Over the next 20 million years, in a hot, unstable, half-recovered world, a different group works its way up from almost nothing. At this moment, they are small, unremarkable, and would have been nobody's prediction. That is where we go next.